Hey there, welcome into Unpaid Interns. We are back after a little bit of a Christmas break, and we are just a couple days away from the Outback Bowl for Indiana football in Tampa on January 2nd. And we have a very special guest today to talk all about it. Chronic Hoosier, one of the great voices on IU Twitter and just of IU sports in general, joins us today. Chronic, really great having you on. How you doing today?
I'm doing excellent, man. Thank you so much for having me on.
And of course, if you're wondering, well, why can't we actually see Chronic's face? Of course, he's a Twitter personality. He has to stay anonymous. So uh, we will hear his voice. We will hear his opinions. If you know who the real person is, then I guess you're in the know. But anyways, I just wanted to get your take first on the whole bowl game situation over the last couple of weeks with IU football. And a lot of fans have been upset with the disrespect maybe we've seen of Indiana football. What's been your take on the whole situation?
I'm at this weird stage of grieving right now, where it's still really, viscerally upset by the slights suffered by Indiana football, both by the playoff committee, but I think the one that stings the most still to this day, as it did when it was announced, was the way the Big Ten treated them and leapfrogging Northwestern over Indiana for the bowl placement. It's a lifetime of suspicion. It's a lifetime of frustration that's fully materialized. It was done out in the open, quite brazenly, rather, and it just doesn't settle really well. It's extremely disappointing, for all the efforts that everybody across the country. Make no mistake, this was a monumentous struggle in athletic departments nationwide, just getting the season off the ground, getting it to the finish line in whatever fashion they could. Most of us limping. For Indiana to excel to the degree which they did, to achieve the successes, all the record-breaking events that happened throughout the season, whether it was, beating Penn State finally, beating Michigan finally, going up and, blanking Michigan State and East Lansing, coming oh so short against Ohio State and best game of the year, at least in the Big Ten. And then to have all of that just completely overlooked, to completely disregard the quality of the wins, is just a slap in the face. It was completely insulting, and it was totally confirming of all the speculation you had that the Big Ten has always been biased against Indiana and will do whatever it takes to elevate the more nationally renowned brands at Indiana's expense. And there's really no way to cut it other than that's absolutely what happened this year. So it's still pretty frustrating. That being said, honestly, I'm also at a point where I'm just really happy that Indiana gets to play another football game. I was reading an article this morning, and Ty Freifogel was quoted as saying just how excited he was to have a chance to play in front of fans just once this season. And it gave me pause and take a step back for all they've achieved, with the exception of a smattering of friends and family in the crowd. The greatest success they've had at Indiana University, at least from a conference win standpoint, and they had to do it in isolation. Nobody was there to share it. So just also recognizing how special of an opportunity it's going to be to get, a reasonable amount of people together and actually watch them play this final game this year. I think that's an opportunity that I know inside the locker room they're looking forward to. But as a fan, I'm happy to see them get the opportunity to be acknowledged and rewarded for all their efforts to get to this point.
For certain. Just kind of one more question on the disrespect, and we saw the really interesting, I thought, quote from Fred Glass after the bowl game announcement about how the Big Ten and just kind of the national college football scene doesn't want to see Indiana succeed. I guess why do you think that is? And is it just with more success from Indiana that eventually changes and they get more respect, both from the Big Ten and even kind of from national pundits who I felt like all season long would pick against Indiana just in games and didn't think they could win. I mean, in terms of Vegas, Indiana has beaten the spread. They're the only team in the country in every single game this season to beat the spread.
I think Fred Glass really he picked a scab that's been there for some time and brought a lot of this stuff out into the open. And I really honestly appreciate the fact that he was willing to do that now in his new removed role from athletics, because I think he spoke a lot of truth to power there. I think for years no differently than Indiana basketball has done. You know, you look at my timeline just in the last week, people are absolutely losing their mind that Indiana lost to Northwestern at home for the same reason that across the Big Ten football landscape, people get really upset when their teams lose to Indiana. You know, historically that this is a team that has not been as competitive as the par for the league, and it's been one of those opportunities where when the schedule's announced, you know, players, coaches, fans, everybody kind of circles those guaranteed wins on the schedule, and that's always served the Big Ten well, having Indiana kind of play the patsy in that sense, and that's no longer the case. And I think goes a lot deeper than just the wins as well. You know, Indiana has been a very fertile recruiting territory forever, it seems, for all the surrounding Big Ten schools, as well as schools like Notre Dame, Louisville, Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State, Wisconsin, for that matter, Iowa. You know, in the last decade, Iowa has had a really, really significant recruiting run, particularly in the Indianapolis area. Um, and they've basically been able to come and cherry pick the best athletes out of the state by offering them a chance to play Big Ten football close to home, but just a little bit further away than Bloomington. So to see an ascend in Indiana certainly threatens the recruiting prospects. It certainly threatens the viability of getting your team past the 500 mark to make bowl eligibility. But I think it extends beyond that. You know, you look at the Big Ten West, which is obviously pretty lopsided competitively since they've moved to these divisional alignments. You know, there are teams over there, Gary Barta's, Iowa being one of them, Barry Alvarez. You know, there is no team in the West that wants to see Indiana get better, because before too long, now you have teams like Michigan, Penn State, that perhaps want to start raising more forcibly the conversation about competitive realignment. And that doesn't really stand to benefit anybody other than Indiana, to be quite honest with you. So there's a lot of reasons uh, for teams not to support Indiana's bid in this particular season, but in almost every season, honestly. And I think Fred did a very good job of forcibly and very succinctly speaking to the disrespect that Indiana suffered. The powers that be just don't want to see it. And, I'm not trying to put a tinfoil hat on here, but clearly, I mean, it is what it is. This is a league that was willing to change its own rules, 4 days before the conclusion of the regular season, so as to keep Indiana out of the Big Ten championship game. This is a league that, for whatever reason, I haven't seen a very good justification yet, was willing to bypass Indiana's bowl placement. They should have had the second best bowl in the league at the Citrus, and instead give it to Northwestern with more losses and a worse head-to-head record against common opponents with Indiana. So it is what it is, man. It's a bunch of BS, and I really hope and believe that Tom Allen is going to be able to channel some of those frustrations and focus them very squarely on Mississippi here this weekend.
I do want to take it back because me and Austin actually talked to you here on Unpaid Interns. It was the week of the Penn State game, right before the season started. And I don't think any of us could have imagined how that game would have turned out. I'm just curious if you could take us back maybe to that night and what that was like emotionally for you and to experience with it, with all the IU fans and Bloomington fans of just an incredible game.
Oh man, that night was absolutely cathartic, and it was the total encapsulation of the IU football experience, right up until the very end of the game. Honestly, the last drive of um, of regulation play. To be honest, it was one of those where, as we've seen time and time and time again, Indiana finds a way to play just well enough to be within striking distance when the game is come down to winning time at the very end, and invariably they always find a way to trip. Every time Lucy's going to pull the football out from underneath you. That's just how it's supposed to end. That's the script. And yet this time they managed to somehow craft it so that it became the most improbable. I mean, the biggest statistical anomaly that you could ever envision actually played out. Um, for Penix to come down and to convert on that final drive, the 2-point conversion, and then obviously the reach in overtime. It was probably the perfect way to break that mold in the most ridiculous possible manner. Because honestly, that mold has only been set by the most ridiculously bad string of luck for decades and decades and decades prior, where Indiana was always just in that position, but always fell just short. So for them to finally get over the hump, literally by a matter of millimeters, I mean, the slightest margins, it was just honestly, it was too perfect. And then, I didn't make it over the stadium afterwards, but I was downtown that night, grabbing some dinner, and to see this campus react in this extremely just unbelievable times with the social distancing and everything else going on. Kirkwood was closed to vehicular traffic. They had the post set up so that it was just for pedestrians. And to see people running shirtless down Kirkwood, hooting and hollering, wearing candy striped pants and bib overalls, high fiving, 70, 80 year olds walking out of Uptown. It was so weird and so surreal, yet so perfect for the moment. I'll never forget it. It was absolutely awesome. My only regret is that we didn't get a chance to do it kind of more communally on the 50-yard line afterwards.
Hmm.
I've often wondered if the goalpost would have survived that night.
I have a hard time believing that they would have survived that night, considering the chaos of that game. One of the most incredible things I think of the turnaround, especially this season, maybe for Indiana, and you can speak to this as someone that's followed this football program for a long time, is the IU defense. Is I think more than anything on the IU football team, especially been the laughing stock of the Big Ten. What even from last year to this year feel changed so dramatically that they've now become really one of the best defenses in the Big Ten and maybe in the whole country?
Oh, it's something that you suspected from the moment Tom Allen was hired when you looked at his career trajectory and the way in which he had immediate and significant measurable impacts on defensive outputs. And, this is a team that you could see them putting the pieces together. And last year, obviously, they were a very, very young team, ton of freshmen and sophomores all across the field, um, but a very talented team. And, a lot gets made about just how much faster the game is as you escalate up each level of competitive play. And you saw those moments where you felt like they were just trying to get caught up to the speed of the game at that moment. This year, it was you got the sense that they were on time, and they were not just on time; they were now playing the game in time. The reactions of that secondary, the way in which they've been able to just be absolute predators in the backfield. I mean, I can't imagine being a quarterback facing that defense right now with the different schemes that Kane Womack's put together and the way that they can mask what they're doing. Just the intelligence of the reads, their ability to get more penetration. I feel like that's been probably the greatest link or missing link up to this point, was keeping consistent pressure on quarterbacks and really forcing them to make some errors. Um, it just the totality of all of it this year it's been the most fun I've ever had watching an IU defense. They're just so incredibly fun because they're so incredibly aggressive. I know Zach and I kind of go back and forth on Mind Your Banners about whether or not this is an opportunistic defense, and when I say that, I don't intend any slight whatsoever. The opportunities are, if they get a read where they think they can run a corner blitz, they're going to take it and they're going to throw it from every different angle all throughout the game. And their ability to do that while minimizing some of those big backbreaking plays, which has usually been their Achilles heel, is as they've tried to progressively get more aggressive on defense. It's always been those big plays that often were the turning point. So to be able to manage the aggression as well as minimize uh, those big plays has just it's been the greatest joy I've ever had watching IU football. I have long said that the defense, particularly the defensive line, is going to be the key to whether or not this team's able to get over the hump to rise to the upper half of the Big Ten, and they've just done it resoundingly this year. It's just been like nothing else I've ever seen, and it's more so it's been kind of awesome to watch that with my dad and my kids, and this is the new expectation now. You're going to watch a team that's going to lead the country in interceptions. Um, and just play some really, really fun football. And not just that, but to control games through the defensive side of the ball is something that's still very foreign, but it's very easy to get used to. Hopefully, there's not a whole lot of drop off after Womack departs here after the bowl game.
Yeah, it was incredible. Tom Allen said before the season started, our goal is 3 interceptions a game. And, I'm thinking, no way, that's unreasonable. And yet Indiana is averaging 3 interceptions per game. Just remarkable what this defense has done for the Hoosiers in this past year. And I mentioned Tom Allen, and everyone in Bloomington certainly in love with Allen, Big Ten Coach of the Year, in the running for a couple National Coach of the Year awards. What challenges did you feel he had to face over these last couple seasons to make this team believe? And I get just what do you feel the qualities that he has that have made this turnaround, dramatic too, from 2 seasons ago to a 5-7 season to now a top 10 team in the country?
Said the key word right there, and it was belief. And it's been remarkable to watch since he arrived. And every new coach takes a job, and they step up to the podium, and they give their basically their inauguration speech, and invariably it's always about that hope and belief, and getting a team to buy into their vision for the program, and describing what type of culture they hope to instill within the team. And the thing about Tom Allen, and I've studied leadership for the better part of my life, to be totally honest with you, um, the science of leadership. And I firmly believe that to lead is to serve. I think example goes a whole lot farther in instilling leadership than just kind of that top down method where you just dictate everything. When you look at the personality, when you looked at the characteristics of Tom Allen, he's so incredibly energetic. He's so incredibly over the top. He's so incredibly optimistic that at first it's so extreme that it's almost difficult to comprehend just how genuine all that is, and what kind of a place that's coming from. And I think when you look at the results Tom Allen's been able to achieve here at Indiana, both since he came as a coordinator and then as well since he's taken the head position, um, Tom Allen is as genuine of an individual as I think you're going to find in the NC2As at any level in any sport. His passion is real. His love is real. And, I find it really, really sweet right now that as the whole country is kind of caught on to the power of LEO, I still very, very uh, much remember when he was first espousing those beliefs, the ridicule, particularly locally in the Indiana media markets, the skepticism that here's this guy, and I think part of it too was Tom's been very open about his religious beliefs, about his faith, and in Indiana it's certainly a very conservative, very religious state. Um, it's kind of uncommon though to see it that forward, particularly in a job like Indiana football, particularly at a public institution in Indiana. It's not that that's frowned upon. It's just Hoosiers are generally a little bit more subdued about some of these things. And I saw a lot of ridicule early on from all corners, to be totally honest, about his message. And is he just gilding the lily here? But as you've seen his career progress, as you've seen the results it's achieved, I think it speaks volumes to the genuineness of the message, but also to the power of the message. Because at the end of the day, you know, to get a team like Indiana to compete against the Michigans, against the Penn States, the Ohio States, just all across the league, you certainly had to elevate the talent, which has long been a shortcoming for Indiana. But even more so, you had to maximize the talent on hand, because let's be honest, you're never going to be able to have a recruiting haul anywhere close to the Ohio States, to the Michigans, to the Penn States in terms of raw talent. It was always going to come down to, very smart selective recruiting, and then maximizing that talent, that potential through development. And oftentimes, especially when leading young people, the biggest obstacle you face is getting them to believe in themselves, and creating a culture where they can create synergy, where the sum is greater than the parts. And in order to do that, you've got to create belief in one another and that trust. And I think as you really drill down on what LEO means and what LEO has achieved here, I don't think you can have any of the successes without that at the foundation of it. Because quite honestly, when you've got a room full of 3 stars with a couple of 4 stars smattered in, having to go line up against a whole bunch of 4 stars and a pretty decent assemblage of 5 stars, the only way you overcome that is through teamwork. And the way they've been able to foster that has just been, it's been unbelievable. It's been inspiring, to be honest with you. Both at the personal level as well as seeing how that message is now resonating throughout the communities in Indiana. Within the fan base, it's a really really powerful thing. And not trying to get too cheesy, man, but that's the power of love, as Huey Lewis would say.
That I mean, it's been something special to watch for certain. I wanted to kind of ask you one more big picture question before we get a little bit more into the Outback Bowl on Saturday. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but when Chronic Hoosier was started as an account back at the beginning of last decade, it was kind of more a basketball focused account, of course, because Indiana football hasn't gotten a lot of attention. I guess what's it been like this year, and especially over the last couple of months with the rise of Indiana football and the massive attention it's gotten nationally and running your account?
That's funny you say that. I think sometime in the middle aughts, I I gave myself this stupid pseudonym and I started engaging online in the IU sports community. And back then, chat rooms were just kind of becoming a thing. Live game chats were starting to pop up. And it was very much a basketball dominated community at that point. It was always funny because, you'd go to the Hoosier Scoop over at the Herald Times with Chris Corman and Dustin Dopiriak. And for basketball games, the room would swell to capacity often, and they were having to constantly change their servers so they could have more people in the chat. And then you'd go watch a football game, and there'd be like 15 people in the room, you know. And I'd be in it on my. Actually, it's funny, man. I just found my old slider phone that I was using from back in those days. Blew my kids' minds. They thought it was some sort of a real ratchet music player or something, like an old Microsoft Zune. But no, I'd be sitting in Memorial, just keeping track, mainly for the real time stats, because back then I used video board was trash, and you really couldn't get a whole lot of information if you weren't sitting up in the press box. So, but there'd be nobody there. All the IU fans were at the game. There weren't a whole lot of people at home just watching it on a Saturday because they had better things to do with their lives than endure that much pain and suffering. And over the years, it was very much kind of a niche culture or subgroup within the overall IU culture, kind of like IU soccer. The only difference was, soccer had this tradition of excellence, where football was kind of the opposite of that. So to see that grow, I think there was kind of a marked turn when IU hired Kevin Wilson. I think that kind of signified that the program was going to take a different direction with the football program, that they were going to invest in the coaching staff. That there's long been a debate. Do you spin big, kind of the Illinois model, and go get some name, some retread that's had success at various levels, but is probably on the back end of their career. IU had long tried poaching the best of the MAC and seeing if they could get that to translate to a Power Five. But it seemed like conventional wisdom said ultimately, if you're going to really get over the hump, you're going to have to go find a big time coordinator who maybe hasn't quite had that opportunity. Entice them with the chance to go compete against the best in the Big Ten, and give them that first opportunity. And Kevin Wilson was obviously a brilliant football mind, culturally probably. Oil and water when it came to his fit within the administration and the university. But I feel like it kind of turned then because people took notice. People became engaged, and honestly, the product improved, at least offensively. It was something where you're actually going to see a team score some points, which was kind of a foreign concept to Indiana for some time. And then obviously the departure of Kevin Wilson, while still shrouded in all sorts of mystery, I think it kind of piqued interest even farther. And then, when they announced Tom Allen in the same breath that they announced Kevin Wilson was being let go, it certainly prompted some skepticism because all of a sudden the process that had led to that transition Now all of a sudden it was like we've totally gone off the rails with it, and now we're just going to promote from within. And there wasn't a whole lot of familiarity at that point with Tom Allen. Um, and I don't know that it necessarily paired the IU football community, but it certainly raised a lot of eyebrows, and I think it caused people maybe to give a more critical look at the program, as well as the administration. But I think as a result of that, people have paid a lot more attention, and people have seen the ascension of Indiana football under Tom Allen, really since that bowl game. Because his first game as a head coach was that Foster Farms or Pinstripe? I can't remember which.
Now it's Foster Farms, I
Foster
think.
Farms, yeah.
Yeah.
And just tracking to see, is this something that did they make the right move? And I think the resounding answer at this point is, yeah, I think they did a pretty good job with that one. That one's paid off. But it's been remarkable to see though the engagement. I think last I checked, I've like 9 million engagements on my Twitter account just in the month
Wow.
of December, and probably 70% of that's been IU football content, which is absolutely insane.
That is quite something. 9 million is a lot of people. I get excited when I get a couple thousand engagements on my Twitter page. But wanted to go a little bit more into the bowl game and get your thoughts. And we were talking at the top of the show, Indiana fans maybe a little bit disappointed didn't get into a New Year's Six Bowl or even the Citrus Bowl, but Indiana football still has not won a bowl game since 1991 in the Copper Bowl. What do you feel like is the meaning of this game? What can a win do, especially for the program going forward?
Oh, it's certainly another significant notch in the belt. I think it's going to be slightly diminished because it's a diminished bowl from what they had rightfully earned. I still firmly believe they should be in the New Year's Six. That being said, it is what it is at this point. There's no changing the decision of the football committee or the Big Ten and its bowl assignment. So, look, it's an SEC opponent, albeit a fairly subpar one at this point, who's really struggling to get together a team that's even going to be able to take the field here this Saturday. But it, like I said earlier, it's a chance for Indiana to get that monkey off its back. When Tom Allen first came in, he said, I forget the exact years, but he talked about how many years it had been since they had a winning season, how many years it had been since they went to a bowl, how many years it had been since they won a bowl, how many years since they won a Big Ten championship. And as they find themselves at the end of this season, um, you know, they've got that penultimate goal is well within reach for them. And in the event that he's going to be able to achieve the goal of getting this team to a Big Ten championship, this is just another one of those steps in the process along the way to get there. And I think that is significant. Perhaps that's a silver lining in the bowl assignment this year, as it certainly makes it far more likely than perhaps if they were in a New Year's Six or the Citrus even. All that said, though, it's an opportunity for them to get a seventh win in a really really weird season this year. It's an opportunity for them to break that streak, and I think that would be very fitting this year, considering all the historical streaks that they have broken. In addition to the Big Ten championship, they've got their sights on the Buckeyes now pretty squarely, and that's going to be a really really sweet one if and when it ever comes. But you got to put one foot first, and that's going to be win this bowl game in front of you. Do it on national television on a game when there's not a whole lot else going on. Do it back in Florida, where Tom Allen's got roots, where a lot of his players have roots, where a lot of future recruits and future Hoosiers currently have roots. I think it's a great opportunity to elevate the program's stature and just put Indiana football on more televisions and more living rooms across the country, and just give them a taste of what LEO is all about.
And another aspect of Saturday's game, for the first time this season for Indiana football fans, the public will actually be allowed at the stadium. What do you feel, I guess, is the meaning for Indiana fans to be able to actually be outside of family, actually be able to watch the team in person? And are you expecting a big IU showing in Tampa? Obviously, it's not a normal year to go down and travel to Florida.
I'm not real sure what to expect. I know At least for extended families within the program, it's a huge opportunity just because there have been so many limitations on who can watch where. I do know several folks, several friends. I'm unfortunately not going to be able to attend again this year. Silly me, I have to start blocking off those days after New Year's. That's not traditionally an IU football period. When you're scheduling events 12, 18 months out. So we got to get that corrected quickly. But I do know a ton of people that are, I say a ton, I do know a pretty good amount of people that are heading down. But I also know several that are, making it a very short trip. Obviously not going with the normal bowl festivities. Um, I think the options are going to be pretty limited as far as the officially sanctioned events. Um, we are still very much in the midst of a global pandemic, and there's a lot of things that take place around the bowl festivities that are maybe not conducive for healthy living during that period. So I'd be kind of fascinated to see what IU's total ticket allocation is, or at least how many people end up buying them and how many show up. But more than anything, just hope everybody stays safe because eventually we've all got to travel back to our homes, and the same issues that have happened over the holidays just kind of get exacerbated when you put add another travel event cross country onto the schedule. That said, though, it's a big stadium. It's an NFL stadium. Hopefully, I know there's going to be some limitations on total attendance, so hopefully everybody's able to go do it safely and get back home with the bowl win in hand and health intact.
And just a little more on the fans, and it's a little early to start looking forward, and we don't know what the world's going to be like in August or September. But I guess fingers crossed that things are back to a good semblance of normal in September. What are your expectations for what Memorial Stadium, I guess, is going to look like in the 2021 season? Or are we going to see sellouts at every game? I mean, in the past, Memorial Stadium's three-fourths empty at halftime, even last year at games. Is it going to be a different kind of atmosphere, I guess, in Indiana football going forward now that this is a top 10 team?
I certainly hope so. That's a conversation that I've had time and time again, year after year after year. It was kind of a chicken or the egg argument. Does Indiana football have to have tremendous fan support in order to achieve, success on the field, or do you have to have a successful team before the fans show up? Because when you look across the country, what separated Indiana from most college football programs, not just was it that there a disparity in the success, but in the support. And I think this year kind of proves the answer to that question pretty resoundingly. And my only hope is that it's welcomed with that uptick in support. This is a generationally good football team, and they deserve that type of support. Filling a 50 plus thousand seat stadium really shouldn't be that tall of an order. To be totally honest, when you look across the country, lesser teams with bigger stadiums that don't really have that big of a problem. I don't know. I think part of it's going to be what the overall campus situation looks like, because quite honestly, when you're talking college sports, the student body is the bedrock of all that support, and I think that needs to that the university needs to be in a place where everybody is back on campus, as close to full participation in class as possible. Because I think that's I'm wildly looking forward to looking across Memorial at the student section and seeing that place absolutely chalked with rowdy IU students who stay for the duration of the game. Um, I think, and I haven't heard any official news. I believe that tickets are already up. Request or demand inquiries are already up right now. But hopefully that comes to fruition. And hopefully that's something that sustains throughout the season, because one of the issues Indiana's long had as well, turnout is awesome when the weather is great, but as things start to turn south in the fall, it slowly dwindles as the weather gets more miserable. But that's, inversely when the games become more consequential. particularly when you're vying for bowl placement, like Indiana seems to be doing pretty regularly now. So, hopefully this is the turning point where this is something we tell our kids about. Back when you could go get a great seat for a cheap price, you could walk up and get a $10 in the door ticket, that puts you right about halfway up the grandstand. So we'll see what that holds, but I'm pretty optimistic about it. And I think across the block, you look at all the departments on campus. This has long been, the biggest potential for IU athletics is to maximize football, and to maximize football, you got to sell tickets. You've got to have a lot of interest, because then you get from the Big Ten network to the national networks, and those paychecks start getting bigger. And, that's the rising tide that's going to lift all boats. So we've long talked about a return to the golden era of IU athletics, and this is the tide that makes that happen. And it certainly seems to be pretty powerful, and even more so sustainable.
You mentioned sustainable, and I guess the question, also big picture question that a lot of IU fans are wondering, and we've seen with other programs, say maybe a Minnesota last year had a 10-win season. Well, it was kind of a blip this year, had a losing record, kind of back to the same old mediocre Minnesota. I'm not sure anyone expects that with IU, but I guess what's the key you feel like for this program going forward to be sustainably a team that gets potentially 9-10 wins in a season, and is competing for New Year's Six bowls year in and year out, and maybe even threatening Ohio State and teams like that for a Big Ten championship?
I think that's kind of multifaceted. You have to have continuity across the program. One of the challenges that IU has already experienced, that's going to continue to be present. Um, you're going to have bigger programs, better resourced programs, poaching your coaching staff. You've got to find a way to retain as much as possible in order to avoid that constant churn in the coach's box, to be totally honest. And it starts with Tom Allen. They have a really solidly built contract right now that's at least going to make him really difficult to poach with his buyout for the foreseeable future. And I would imagine Scott Dolson's going to continue to bolster kind of those defenses. But you've got to be able to do the same with the assistants on staff. We've already seen a pretty good turnover in the coordinator ranks in the last couple of years. So at the end of the day, though, that's not possible unless you're buying tickets. So that's the one key component that I keep circling back to. If everybody loves watching, a successful Indiana football team, do your part. Buy the season tickets, donate to IU athletics, to the varsity club, because that's how IU keeps this thing going. Part of that too, though, is when you have continuity across the staff, you have continuity in the recruiting, and the talent that you're able to bring in, and continuing to upgrade that as well. And Indiana has bridged a pretty big gap. Kind of going crazy. We're getting ready to travel down to go see some family, and he knows it's time to hit the road, so he's pretty jacked up about this weekend as well.
Sounds excited.
No, he's a very excitable boy. But no, you've got to find a way to to keep the talent pipeline opened up, and they've done a great job there. But like I said earlier, it's one thing to find those diamonds in the roughs, those undervalued 3 stars, and turn them into All-Americans. Micah McFadden, Ty Freifogel, great examples of that. You also get to a point, though, where other teams start taking notice of those guys when you start making those offers, when you start showing up for those workouts, and that field becomes increasingly more difficult to harvest as you continue to elevate that. So the investment in the recruiting is very much going to continue to be a key component of it. But there's a whole lot of little pieces that go together to make it happen. But I guess big picture, it starts at the top. You've got to find a way to keep Tom Allen on the payroll, and you've got to find a way to keep the guys he wants to be working with on the payroll with him, because it's a really, really big ship, and it takes a whole lot of hands to keep it pointed in the right direction. And at the end of the day, that all comes down to money. And Indiana being a considerably smaller school and a considerably better resource division, there's a whole lot of issues that have to get tackled in order to keep that sustainable. But like I said earlier, adequate fan support makes a whole lot of those problems a whole lot easier to manage.
Just a couple more questions for your Chronic. It sounds like your dog is ready to go, so don't want to keep you too much longer. So with the Outback Bowl specifically, what do you think is a key for Indiana to get a victory, and give us a prediction for the game?
Yeah, they got to put some points on the board. Jack Tuttle's going to have to find a way to keep them on schedule and to keep the ball moving downfield. They're going to have to convert red zone opportunities into touchdowns. I mean, look, Mississippi is pretty wildly understaffed right now due to COVID injuries and opt outs. I still would not take that offense very lightly. They are extremely potent. They have a lot of players in the field that are going to be able to score the football. It starts with the quarterback. That said, defense is going to have to do everything they can to disrupt. That three takeaways is going to be absolutely critical. Because at the end of the day, if this turns into a shooting match, that's the one thing is, Jack Tuttle has not been forced into that position. Obviously, there's a whole lot of positions he's not been forced into, with basically just a game and a half under his belt so far this season. Defense is going to have to hold serve. They're going to have to create some takeaways, but ultimately the offense is going to have to convert those opportunities into points. This is not one of those games where I think you can settle on 24 points and feel comfortable that that's going to be enough to do it, because even a depleted Mississippi team is still very capable of putting some points on the board really, really quickly. So, and part of it too is, if the offense is able to stay on schedule, defense is going to need to be able to get some rest. So they're going to have to be able to control the clock as best they can. They're going to have to be able to get some turnovers, and more than anything, Jack Tuttle's got to find a way to get that ball in the end zone quite a bit.
Well, before I let you go, I do have to ask one question about IU basketball. Not as fun to talk about, unfortunately, as IU football for many Hoosier fans right now. But you put out a tweet after the Illinois game. It is kind of, I feel, criticizing maybe some people in the fan base for having a referendum on the coaches and team after every loss. I guess, can you expand on that, and when maybe this season could you hit the panic button potentially on Archie Miller and this team that's currently going into a big game with Penn State today, 0-2 in the Big Ten?
I'm glad you asked about that. I've kind of left that one on the back burner since I hit send on it, and it's elicited a lot of responses. Look, every game, I do have a lot of engagement, and after every loss, the engagement gets extremely negative. Calls to basically run every player off the roster, calls to fire the entire coaching staff, just to nuke the whole thing. And look, we are 3 years and a third season through the Archie Miller era right now at Indiana, and I think it's for all the people that want to say, look, we're a blue blood, we should be better than this. Well, take a step back and see what you just said. How many blue bloods do you see across the country that are firing coaches, 3.5 years into their tenure? It's so contradictory. It's almost insane. I recognize where it's coming from, the passion behind those comments, the passion of the Indiana community. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. It's a program that needed a complete retooling, to be totally honest with you. It's a program that needed to find some identity that it could build upon. And, in selecting Archie Miller, they found a coach who was very defensive minded, who hadn't necessarily had the opportunity to really show what he was capable of at an institution as large as capable of Indiana as one of the blue chips, if you will. And honestly, you look at specifically what this team struggles with. Obviously the backcourt has a lot of shortcomings right now. The front court has very, very little depth. And it's just created some issues for them, particularly when Trace Jackson sits down, the offense kind of grinds to a halt. But when you get on the micro level, what's going on with this team? Look at your leadership still. Yes, we are in year 4, but we're 3 1/3 of the way through it game wise. There's still a significant leadership issue with this program, at least on the floor. Al Durham, Tom Crean recruit who Archie was able to retain, not necessarily producing at a level that you would expect, or that's going to be sufficient enough to get it done. The junior class, Rob Finney is effectively part of Archie's first recruiting class. Um, he's shown some potential, but again, he's not necessarily getting it done. Race Thompson, while technically a junior, was part of that first recruiting class. He redshirted, but when you look at the decisions Archie's made and the way in which he's built the program, first year you have to give him a pass. Those weren't his players. That was all he was able to retain at that point. It was just so late in the recruiting cycle, and the fact that he was able to keep what he had. Now, granted, there's been a whole lot of attrition out of that class as well. That's basically left him with just Al Durham. But Race Thompson has proven to be a pretty key part of this program so far. But when you move to that subsequent class, when you look at what Trace Jackson Davis, what Armand Franklin have been able to bring to this program, you've got to be thrilled with at least that element of it. And obviously, there's been some misses as well. Demezi Anderson, part of the same class, didn't necessarily work out, and certainly created a hole in the roster. But it's one of those where I feel like people are it's very short-sighted right now to be calling for the removal of the coach to run the players off. Look, it's a every season's a journey. This one obviously is a challenging journey, but when you take a step back and look at what's working, what's not, I just find it really irrational to believe that the verdict is in, that this team, this program's never going to be any better than what they are right now, because quite honestly, they still haven't even had a chance to fully show what they are at this point. I still think realistically 5 to 7 years is probably the runway that a coach in this position has to have if you're really serious about building something that's what most folks would expect from Indiana basketball.
That was great insight there, Chronic, and really appreciate all your insight today on IU football, and hope you're able to, wherever you're watching, hope you're able to enjoy the Outback Bowl on Saturday.
Looking forward to it, man. Safe travels. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much, Chronic. That will do it for today's episode of Unpaid Interns. If you've missed any of our episodes, as always, you can check them out on the IU Sports Media YouTube page, or you can listen to them in audio form wherever you get your podcast. I actually earlier today recorded an episode with Ole Miss reporter and IU alum Courtney Robb from Mississippi to break down Ole Miss and the bowl game a little bit further. That's going to be posted tomorrow morning, Thursday morning. So go check that out for a little bit more in-depth coverage of the Outback Bowl. And then we'll be back with another Unpaid Interns episode after the Outback Bowl next Monday. That'll do it today for Unpaid Interns. For Chronic Hoosier, I'm Griffin Epstein. Have a great rest of your Wednesday. So long, everyone.